Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of GeoPod. I'm your host Dylan Woods, and today we're going to do an old-fashioned strategy breakdown for you guys. So obviously the situation in the Middle East is rapidly escalating, rapidly developing. The Gerald R. Ford US aircraft carrier is en route to Middle Eastern waters, pertaining to the preparation of an imminent or potential US strike upon the Ayatollah regime of Iran. Now, previously on this channel, I have gave you my 2 cents on how the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group could best approach a tactical and strategic situation with Iran, how they could nullify the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy in an early stage, and how they could nullify the threat of drones, cruise and ballistic missiles. Obviously now the situation has changed a bit, more intelligence and data has reached our ears pertaining to what kind of operation this will likely be. So what we know or what we understand right now is that it's most likely going to be a joint Israeli-United States operation, which obviously changes the way that operation will be planned, will be organized and will be executed. So this will be my final strategic breakdown pertaining to an armed conflict between Israel, the United States and Iran on the other side. So obviously we have seen a lot of rumors, we've seen a lot of opinions being spouted on social media, on news networks, news outlets, newspapers, you name it. And once again, I'm here to give you my take of it all. There's a couple of things that I would like to clear up. There's a couple of things that in my opinion, are not being highlighted enough. And also a little bit some misconceptions pertaining to Iran's ability to effectively coordinate their offensive maneuvers and efforts. So one of the main things that I've seen pass by on social media and on news outlets, news networks, is obviously Iran's vast arsenal of ballistic missiles, right? This will probably be the greatest threat towards any US or Israeli force, right? Iran has heavily relied on its arsenal of missiles and projectile weapons and drones in order to keep up and maintain and bolster its deterrence, right? It's by far the most, I would say, the military element of Iran that has the most depth, right? They have quite significant stockpiles of ballistic and cruise missiles, even after Israel's 12-day war with Iran last year. So yes, that ballistic missile program is degraded, and Iran is still reeling from those effects. However, there still is plenty of munitions left. There are plenty of rockets, plenty of missiles still left in those storages that could potentially damage Israeli and United States assets within the region, right? Now, here's the thing. Pertaining to Iran's ballistic missile capability, ammunitions, numbers are not the problem. We know Iran possesses the numbers. Here is what the 12-day war between Israel and Iran has shown us regarding Iran's capability. Yes, they have the numbers. However, their problem lies within command and control, coordination, which obviously is a direct side effect of a lack of command and control, and accuracy, right? Yes, Iran possesses many different missiles, ballistic missiles, many of whom have a range of 1,000 miles 1,000 kilometers or more. However, not all have the same error radius. There are a couple more modern missiles, such as the Fatah-1, which has a significantly smaller ratio of error than, let's say, the Ghadar missiles, which have a much broader radius of error. So, obviously, when we're talking about a coordinated assault by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, targeting multiple United States or Israeli assets within the region, you have to have a solid command and control structure backed up by vast coordination efficiency in order to bolster your accuracy and make sure that those missiles actually hit their intended targets, right? What we've seen in the 12-day war between Israel and Iran last year is that Iran failed to damage any significant military infrastructure on Israel's part. And they shot barrages after barrages, volleys after volleys of ballistic missiles, backed up by hundreds and hundreds of drones. Yet they failed to strike one significant military target. So that is something to keep in mind. Yes, as all these news outlets have spouted over the past few days, yes, theoretically Iran's missiles can strike every US military base within the Middle East. That's not the problem. However, can they do it in a coordinated fashion on multiple fronts simultaneously, backed up with proper accuracy and a proper command and control structure? And in their last war with Israel, when they were at their supposed and alleged full strength, they didn't show the capabilities of doing that. Now we're talking about a joint United States-Israeli operation that will bring perhaps 3 to 4 times the amount of military assets as, let's say, Israel on its own has at its disposal last year. So we're looking at an entirely different ballgame here. Now, if you are the United States, yes, you take the threat of Iran's ballistic missiles seriously. So here's how you go about it. Obviously, the military bases of the United States within the Gulf states and Oman will be the first to be targeted by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Why? Because it's the shortest range, the closest proximity, meaning Iran can rely on its shorter range cruise missiles and shorter range ballistic missiles, of which they have plenty in order to strike those military bases. So what you're doing if you're the United States of America, you go after those launch sites closest proximity to you first. Now, what we know from last year's war between Israel and Iran is that most of Iran's ballistic missiles launch sites are located in the southwest or in the northwest of the country, namely the Tabriz, the Kermanshah, Esfahan and the Tabriz provinces. So obviously these missile launch sites is what you're going after first. And Israel has created the blueprint for that last year. That's exactly what they did. They went after the launch sites within Western Iran, the closest proximity to their own country, forcing Iran to delve into its stockpiles of longer range missiles, which they could fire with in lesser numbers, and obviously with more significant costs in case they didn't hit their intended targets, which obviously they didn't, as I've just outlined. So you want to make the war as costly as possible, in as early a stage possible for the Iranians, for the Ayatollah regime. So you want to safeguard your bases to the fullest extent possible. You want to mitigate the follies that Iran is able to launch at you. You want to mitigate their numbers and mitigate their frequency, just as Israel did last year. The blueprint to beat Iran's missile force is already been laid. Israel last year in its war with Iran succeeded in nullifying Iran's launch capabilities by over 50% in just 12 days. Now we're talking about a joint United States-Israeli operation backed by 2 US carrier strike groups, which obviously enhances those numbers significantly. And I've heard many comments on US news outlets pertaining to secret launch sites that Iran adheres to launch its longer range missiles. And sure, they may have some bases that have not yet been exposed, both by Israeli and United States intelligence. However, what we could see from last year was that Israel's intelligence was spot on pertaining to the location and launch sites of these ballistic missiles and their air defense umbrellas in close proximity to them. And Israel was able to take them out with lethal, with clinical precision and accuracy. And if Israel had that intelligence at that particular moment in time, we have to assume that that intelligence has only become more profound and it's being shared with US command as we speak. So no, the bulk of Iran's ballistic missile launch site has been exposed by Israeli and United States intelligence. This conflict that is about to occur, or is potentially going to occur, we have to understand, will not occur in a vacuum. This is not a sudden escalation. No, both Iran, the United States and Israel have prepared years, if not decades, for this exact moment in time. So intelligence will most likely be very on point and much more profound than the current news outlets are professing at this particular moment in time. Israel has laid, again, I'm saying it again, Israel has laid the blueprint on how to beat Iran's missile capabilities, or at the very least to nullify it to the fullest extent possible. The United States, all the United States has to do is make use and optimize and utilize that intelligence in order to create devastating damage and nullify the risk to their own force to the fullest extent possible. So you're going after launch sites in closest proximity to the most vulnerable US military bases. So for example, if the United States military bases in the Gulf states are your biggest concern, you go after the launch site in the Shaders province, right? You go after the launch site in Esfahan, and you let the Israelis deal with Tabriz, you let the Israelis deal with Kermanshah, just as they did last year in the 12-day war they waged against Iran, right? Now, obviously, that will nullify the ballistic missile capabilities of Iran significantly. What you want to be doing in any situation or any scenario such as this, you want to get your aircraft in the air as quickly as possible. You want to infiltrate airspace and gain air superiority or air supremacy in the earliest states possible. Why? Because that's the biggest That's the first line of defense. The first line of defense, your missile defense approach and your blueprint to counter those long-range capabilities of your adversary. You want your advanced planes in the air so they can shoot down, so they can nullify the launch site first and foremost, in as early as a state possible. When counter volleys are being launched towards you, your air fighters will already be in the sky in order to take down a large percentage of them. Then those that will come through will be easily intercepted by the air defense umbrellas of both the United States military bases on the mainland as well as the carrier strike groups within proximity and within theater. So that's what you're going to be looking for. Now the second threat, and I've obviously talked about this on my channel previously as well, is the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps Navy, right? You want to be able to nullify their command and control structure in the earliest stage possible, right? What the Navy of Iran is going to try to do is wage asymmetrical campaigns, asymmetrical counterattacks against US carrier strike groups in order to, at the very least, to disrupt their operations and do as much damage as possible, right? Now, I've previously laid out a framework on how to oppose that, so I won't necessarily go into too deep of that right now, but that strategy still remains the same, right? You want to split up, if possible, you want to split up, you want to divide your strike groups, right? And let's say one will take out the launch sites and the long-range capabilities of Iran on the mainland, particularly those sites within the western and southwestern provinces, and the other one will go after the naval ports. You go after the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps command and control structure, and you take down the naval and maritime capabilities to the furthest extent possible. At the very same time, upholding a deterrent to any naval counteroffensive, whether symmetrical or asymmetrical, on your adversary's part. You want to create maximum damage in the earliest stage possible. This is effective. Why? It doesn't necessarily need to neutralize 100% the naval capabilities of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, but to nullify it to the fullest extent, meaning that if a counteroffensive will take place, and it will, right? We have seen Iran counterattack Israel, answer their airstrikes with volleys and barrages of missiles, drones and cruise missiles. So yeah, that's most likely going to occur. Perhaps joined by Hezbollah, perhaps joined by the Houthis in Yemen. Who knows? However, those counteroffensives will be significantly less significant and inferior in numbers pertaining to the projectiles that are being launched at you, as well as the watercraft, if those coordination frameworks and command and control structures are no longer in place or can no longer operate at their full doctrinal efficiency. And that's what you want to elicit here. Now, once you've cleared the sky, once you've gained some level of air superiority, some measure of air superiority, then you go after the Ayatollahs, right? And that's something, especially with two carrier strike groups in the region, as well as the Israeli Air Force on your side, you might do straight from the get-go, right? There might be 2, 3, 4 layers to this joint operation that can be initiated and executed simultaneously. And if that's the case, then great. Once again, Iran has no air force on its own, meaning the stealth fighter jets of both the United States and Israel can operate with impunity above Iranian skies. Again, last year's war between Israel and Iran has shown that. Iran has no answer to advanced 5th generation fighter jets. They just don't at this point in time. Their air defenses are significantly less effective, less numerical, and just not cut out for the task, right? Now, there's another component here that, as I've previously said on this channel, I believe the Israelis failed to properly utilize, and that's the information element, right? The hearts and minds element, if you like, psyops, psychological warfare. We know that as of this particular moment in time, internal dissent is growing within the Ayatollah regime. The hardliners and the reformists are opposed. Opposition factions within Kurdistan provinces, within Tehran itself, are on the rise, are growing bolder. The protests are growing bigger, and they are maintaining their consistency, which is very important. So we're not talking about a regime that's fully rooted in their power as of this particular moment in time. So what you want to be doing, and as by any measure I believe the United States is already doing this at this particular moment in time, is you want to organize these opposition factions and forces. You want to bolster them, support them in any which way, whether that be militarily, rhetorical, or economical, so they can distract some of the attention of the regime, especially occupy some of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's ground forces, which have been employed to counter these massive protests, in order to increase and maintain that ever-growing dissent within the regime, and obviously at the end of it all utilize that to overthrow and topple it in general, so that another opposing faction can claim power, and from that moment forth can be negotiated with as to where to steer the country going forward. So that's what you want to be doing. This is a war on multiple fronts. In my opinion, this operation is in no way, shape or form a complex one. As I've said before, Iran cannot contest Israeli and US air power over their own skies. They don't have the ability to do so, meaning their options for counteroffensives are significantly limited. Iran will be most strongest in the first 1 or 2 days, perhaps even the first 24 hours, not even 2 days of this conflict, which is where the United States and Israel need to be the most aggressive. Take out those launch sites, especially those within western provinces of the country, where the bulk of their ballistic missile launch sites are being kept, and then you swipe out and go further north and east from there, whilst at the same time nullifying the extent of astrometrical maritime operations executed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, whilst going after the chain of command and initiating simultaneous information campaigns alongside that. In my opinion, this is an operation that can be concluded within a week's time, given the fact that Iran's ballistic missile program has been degraded in the wake and aftermath of last year's war with Israel. And speaking of, we now have two great military powers joining their efforts with one clear objective, and that's the overthrow of the Ayatollah regime. At the same time, the Ayatollah regime is cracking from the inside, the reformists are rising, even the hardliners are starting to take some steps back. So it is in no way, shape or form unimaginable to me that the regime will crack within a week's time. I will give this operation 2 weeks max. I believe the United States and Israel can nullify Iran's ballistic missile capabilities within a week's time, especially when we're talking about a joint operation. Obviously, a lot of elements and a lot of facets of this operation are still speculative, right? We don't have any guarantee that it will indeed be a joint operation, and to what extent. That's a matter to decide pertaining to the Israeli and United States commands. But this is my strategic blueprint of how to deal with the Iranians swiftly, efficiently, and devastatingly, to make sure that they will no longer pose a threat to the region, at the very least not to the extent as they have done for the past few decades. Now, this is my final piece, my final blueprint, my final strategies on how to deal with this ruthless regime that for too long has tainted the Middle East, for too long has wreaked both regional and geopolitical havoc. And I will be more than glad to see one of the four horsemen going down either before the end of the month or at the beginning of next month. So then the next question obviously becomes, is there something Iran can do to avoid all of this? Well, obviously yes. They can halt their nuclear programs, halt their ballistic missile program, and halt their support for the axis of resistance. However, they're not going to do that, given that all of their deterrence, the whole deterrence strategy is based upon these three factors. What they might do is, as a last resort, at the last minute, is push forward some proposition where they profess to submit themselves to additional compromises that might, at least for the short term, be acceptable for the United States and Israel. Pretty much the same way they did at the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015. Now then the question obviously becomes, will that at this point in time be good enough for the United States and Israel, given the fact that Iran has time and time again over the course of the past decades broke their own agreements, failed to adhere to the strict rules outlined in these agreements and in these memorandums. So that remains to be seen. If anything, this is my strategic blueprint on how to beat the Ayatollah regime and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. If you want to review my previous clip that I did pertaining to the USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, it's still on my channel, so feel free to rewatch that clip and refamiliarize yourself with some of the strategies that are outlined there. This is all that I want to share with you today. As I've said, this will be my final breakdown pertaining to any military confrontation between Israel, the United States and Iran. Thank you very much for listening to this clip. If you have any comments for me, any questions for me, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below or reach out to me on one of my socials, and aim to get back at you as soon as possible. Thank you very much for listening to this clip, and I wish you all a pleasant day.